Well, I'm gonna stop recording.
Welbers, I have Shavira.
And then La La Land.
I had a very tough time getting on this time. I think he changed it a bit. And are you stuck for the passcode? That took me a while to get through.
I think all I have to do is click on join with video and I'm there.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
But remember, this is a new passcode. This is a new link. It's not the same one we had for the last couple of months.
Eric
was that why I waited so
is
long?
not coming, I
didn't
think.
use it
Is that
before,
right?
Tom.
I'm not sure. Here comes George.
Because I know he's driving up to Oregon.
Yes, yes.
Ah, that's right.
I see a G, which probably, there's Crook. Bravo.
There
Okay,
you are.
you're on, buddy.
Da, 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 da.
We're the Fab Four today.
Okay.
So we're the Fab Four,
Oh,
but we're being recorded for the
Posterity.
for the two that can't make it. The what would be an alliterative adjective for them?
the terrible twos.
Well, that could be.
So Tom, how's your health?
My health is really very, very good. Both the doctors, saw them both on Wednesday. The general kind of urological oncologist named,
Urological oncologist. Oh, okay.
right, mhm, up at St. John's in Santa Monica, Zimslav Twardowski, that's it. He's obviously Polish.
Carlos.
And he was quite pleased that my PSA level is at 0. So,
Wow.
That's-
fantastic.
or less than 0.5, whatever that means. So it apparently the combination of radiation and hormone, which are going to continue for another year and a quarter.
The both those or just the
No,
hormone?
the radiation's over,
Thank God.
probably not to be repeated.
Was that difficult, Tom?
Radiation? No,
Wow, it's great.
it was doubly easy. Number one, because the side effects were minimal. A little bit of, shall we say, different sorts of schedules and, well, let's say more frequent bladder and bowel function.
Hmm.
But it was not painful at all.
How many
Very-
radiations did you get?
37,
Uh-huh.
How
Uh,
many?
pardon, 37,
Wow.
37. It was 7 weeks.
Wow.
And but the best part is it was City of Hope, and they're about the best.
Mhm.
But they have a South Bay campus, which is 8 minutes from where I'm living here.
Well, you've got everything very close at hand, don't you?
Yeah. So,
Nice.
I'm grateful that I didn't have to go out to Duarte or to Santa Monica every day. So
Yeah, that's great.
it was minimally, it still took about a total of an hour's worth out of the middle of the day. But that's better than being 2 hours to get there, 10 minutes to have the treatment, and 2 hours to get back.
Yeah.
Right, right. Is your follow-up Lupron, Lupron?
Right. Yeah, I think so.
That was mine.
It's called
And the side effects for me were so severe that they stopped it after maybe 3 months.
Okay. Well, I've been getting, very frequent hot flashes, but they're not, that's really the only side effect.
Mine were
Yes, I can-
quite dramatic, yeah.
But mine, I wouldn't classify them as dramatic. At
How do
least
you-
not, at least not as severe as most of the women seem to complain.
About
Yeah.
hot flashes.
Hot flashes, yeah.
How,
Yes,
And that-
apparently it's absolutely the same phenomenon, right?
It is, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, there was a certain endearment that I had with my ex and my two daughters when they heard about the
Hmm.
hot flashes.
Yeah, they said,
is that a hormonal response or?
yeah, and I guess it's what the pineal gland or something that that basically controls your perception of temperature. And and I think it's kept regular by the sex hormones, whether it's estrogen or testosterone.
Oh, yeah.
So a reduction in either of them or a deprivation in either of them throws the pineal gland, and I think that's what it is, off kilter. And so it basically doesn't know what temperature it is or how to regulate your body temperature.
You guys, I'm gonna have to come to you, all three of you, when this stuff gets to me. I've not had any issues with my prostate ever. I hope it stays that way, but when it does, I've got three experts here.
Well, yeah,
Or three guinea pigs.
usually it happens around 70,
Yeah.
late 60s or 70. I was what, 2009, so I would be 75. No, 73
60,
when it happened. Oh,
2009. No, that was 11 years ago.
that was 11 years ago. So, yeah, about 65,
Yeah.
64, 65, and had the prostate out. And it was supposedly no sign of it breaching the capsule wall. But after 6 or 7 years, my PSA began to go up. And
There are lymph nodes there that I think they worry about the cancer spreading from prostate into those
Right.
lymph nodes close by.
yeah, because if it gets hold in the lymph nodes and grows, it can, the lymph nodes are the freeway to the rest of the body.
Rapid expansion danger, yeah.
I thought it went first to your bones.
It can.
That's what got J-Bro. It
Oh,
went,
yeah.
it went from prostate to lymph nodes to bones, and that took his life.
What
Yeah, I
is it
think
that-
I think the lymph nodes are closer. So, the radiation was aiming basically at the whole prostate bed. And now that I'm thinking of it, well, then they zeroed in on the lymph nodes. But the last 10 treatments were far more precisely targeted.
Okay, that's similar to mine.
Yeah.
I had 48 radiations, first 24 to the prostate itself, and the second 24 to lymph node specific.
Uh-huh.
We'll have to call you guys the Hiroshima Maidens.
Okay.
What is it
So
that-
what machine was it that you were on?
I don't recall. It was Kaiser Permanente
Mhm.
in Riverside. And there were about 8 of us who rode a bus from Orange out there, got our treatments and a bus back. So we had to dedicate about a half a day
Mm.
to get that. But I'm not aware of
48
what the
days.
machine
Oh,
itself was.
And
Yeah,
Tom,
it
was
was-
the-
Mine was the Varian True Beam. And Varian is one, I guess, one of the bigger manufacturers of that kind of stuff, the
Uh-huh.
linear accelerator.
and did you say you walked to this place?
No,
Oh,
no, I could have walked in about 45 minutes to an hour,
oh.
but I was much too lazy. 10 years ago, I probably would have walked. I keep telling myself I've got to get back to walking.
What is it that Bob did that you guys did not, or vice versa, that he did not that you guys did? That, or is it just a matter of chemistry and predisposition and all that kind of stuff? I was very
I'm
surprised that he.
Pretty sure that he went only for the surgery. And it was, if I remember right, it was about 3 or 4 years after he had the prostate removed that his tests started to come up and they found the cancer was in the lymph nodes. And before they were able to get after it with radiation, it was already into the hip bones or thigh bones or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does that mean that when they did the surgery, they did not get all the cancer, and so they were done with the surgery, and time passed, and the lymph nodes were infected, so it just kept spreading? Is that what that means?
I would say, I think that's what it was. They were so confident they got it all
Yeah.
with the surgery that they did not treat the lymph nodes.
Aren't there?
Thank God they did with mine.
Yeah, aren't there? Shouldn't there be follow-up? Frequent follow-up visits and tests to make sure that.
Tom's much more current than I on that.
Well, I don't know. My surgery was in 2009. Right. Well, actually, it was about 3 or 4 days before Obama's inauguration. And, the doctor was pretty confident he got it all. So, he just basically said, keep an eye on the PSA. But my theory is that, a few stray cells can get away and be dormant
Sure.
for a while and lodge somewhere and then suddenly start into activity. And apparently, as I understand it, when they first start into activity, they're what they call it an indolent stage. And that could remain indolent, or it could grow rapidly and become very aggressive.
Well, the science must be coming along quickly. I don't know if, would Dan have insights into that, Ned?
I don't think so.
No.
Well, I do have a couple of insights because I joined the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and their newsletter said that there are 2 major developments that have just happened. One is a much more sensitive PET scan, which is more sensitive than the previous one, which I had twice. And my doctor said, look, if there's any indication that there's still more activity, that they'll probably do that PET scan because that would locate it a little more precisely. And the other one is that there is an experimental treatment that may be on the verge of public approval that uses nanoparticles that specifically target prostate cells to deliver a chemotherapy to, so that they can do a very targeted chemotherapy now on it.
So they've got these particles that they're like heat-seeking missiles and
Sort
flying.
of like the development of nanotechnology in delivering medication, particularly for cancer, is, has just developed tremendously over the last 10 or 12 years. And the idea of the nanotechnology is, I mean, it's kind of on the molecular level, that there is a molecule, like, I think gold is one of them, that they can get a 1 molecule thick bubble around a few molecules of this targeting medication. And they can actually target it to a way that it's accepted by the cancer cells and rejected by the others.
Wow.
Now, to me, that's absolutely mind-blowing, and I'm not sure that I'm
Amazing.
describing it. I'm describing it in a kind of a layman's term, but it's a terribly interesting development that probably is, over the next few years, will, I think it's in the process of revolutionizing a lot of cancer treatment.
Wow.
The precision with which they can target chemotherapy. It basically used to be that, and still is a lot, that chemotherapy is essentially, they inject a poison into you with your fingers crossed, hoping that it kills the cancer before it kills you.
Sometimes it's a neck and neck race.
Sometimes it's a neck and neck race, and sometimes it's a race the cancer wins.
But then it dies when you do.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Pyrrhic victory for the cancer.
Pyrrhic victory. But it's like the two hikers that are surprised by a mountain lion, and one of them starts running and the other one starts running after him, and he shouts out, "You can't outrun a mountain lion." And he says, "I don't have to, I just have to outrun you."
Run you, yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, we're either talking about our diseases of old age, or we're talking about Lonergan.
Yeah, lately, that's true. Did any of you guys finish the book by Mark, whatever his last name was?
Mark Miller, is it? Yeah, Mark Miller.
Miller.
I haven't gotten farther than the part 1. Have you?
Part 2, but that's all.
Yeah.
I got to part 2, and actually I went through 4 chapters, so part 2. That was a tough read.
Yeah. No, I haven't gotten beyond the natural stuff into the, whether the decline or the destruction or the fall or whatever.
Yeah, I'm still marooned in chapter 2. Shame on me, but I am. I've been thrashing about with other stuff. But everything, I mean, Lonergan is, he had a cataloging kind of mind. I mean, he really was doing a summa of reality, it seems. I mean, that's not unimpressive. Oh, yes, I'm going to analyze everything that is, I mean, that's somewhat confident. Like he said, he spent, I think I read, he spent 10 years just, what do you call it? Ascending
Aquinas.
Thomas, Aquinas.
Yeah, looking up to him and getting there.
Yeah.
He said.
and then I cracked that, and I decided I'd go on to, whatever else.
I thought,
But-
I thought there was both an arbitrariness and just an amazing intuitive genius when he decided he couldn't figure out the dynamics of all of the elements that whirl around each other with respect to economics and philosophy and history and all that kind of stuff. And so
I've had that problem.
yeah, but then he picks the dynamics of our solar system, where we've got these ellipses that are being created by gravity, the sun, the planets, and the influences that they have,
Excuse me.
and somehow using that in analyzing the influence of history and philosophy and economics, etc. It seemed to me, well, how confident can you be that that's the appropriate relationship dynamic? But when he puts it into play, it yields such amazing stuff.
Mhm.
I just a genius, amazing.
What I'd like to know, and I think I may have mentioned this in an email to everybody, but I may have been targeting Fred, of course, a little bit more. Has there been any work trying to relate contemporary brain science with Lonergan's cognitive theory? And what impresses me is, he's mostly, his sources seem to be, although he's using somewhat up-to-date analogy, his sources for what the consciousness and mind does is sort of rooted in older philosophical understandings of the soul.
Mhm.
And the mind, the intellect, the mind, the will, and so on being functions of the soul. And of course, one of the problems in contemporary belief is that almost, with an emphasis on almost, everything that we used to attribute to divine intervention or divine activity in our world and to the soul in our humanity can be explained, those functions can be explained by the how neurons work in our brain. So that the functions of the soul are no longer such a mystery because we locate them in different parts of the brain in the way that the neurons fire and process things. Similarly, so much of what we always said God controls, we know that, well, God doesn't control that directly, but it's weather patterns and tectonic movements and science now has a handle even down to the molecular level, as well as the intergalactic Big Bang level of the natural processes that by which our world works. So it's kind of like the God of the gaps is no longer a valid theological principle. It was, but it isn't any longer. Now, I think people like Barron are right in saying, well, the God of the gaps is too small. Mm. The God of the gaps is what all the militant atheists are rejecting. But, the philosophical and theological concept of God is beyond human conceptualization. So, but I'm wondering if anybody has tried to relate that to the cognitive functions of the human mind and the biological functions, on which many scientists will say, you know, our consciousness is dependent on biology, not on a soul. And so that's kind of my question. I don't know if it's an ignorant one or not, but
Well, that's a good question, I think.
Yeah, I think it is too. And if I can make an intellectual jump, the fact that Lonergan and Fred Lawrence spent a lot of time together, my sense is that Lawrence, being as pastoral as I have felt with our interaction,
Yeah.
may have a significant insight to that.
mhm.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine what you were saying, Tom, and I had concluded that, and it sort of fits into some prior stuff in my thinking with respect to the Trinity and in the analogy of the Trinity in all of reality. But it seemed to me that Lonergan took the dynamics of, again, our solar system, and I guess the universe, but the solar system, to be more simple, and used that to explain relationships in history, you know, this historical theology, or the theology of history that he was talking about. And when I think about, and then he used, as you said, the categories, some, I don't know whether to call them traditional or not, but traditional or established categories of the divisions of the thinking and willing mind, so the soul. And when you now bring up the brain and the function of the brain, neurons, tendrils, I mean, you know, all of that stuff that sort of spreads out like plants, you know, like roots. It seems to me not to fit with the, you know, the gravity kind of, you know, analogy that Lonergan was using, but it's got to fit in there somewhere, because he did use these categories of thinking and willing. That's curious.
And that makes me curious, having Shavira and Crook together. How about Herbert? And did any of that come up in your interactions with him?
Not with me.
Not with you?
It did with me. I told him I remembered an aha moment in 1961.
Oh my.
Here I was in first semester, sophomore year. And before we started Father Berger's logic course,
Yes.
in second semester, we had in first semester a survey course in psychology. Remember?
Yep.
Yeah. And I was sitting on a park bench in Maywood, California, in this little teeny park with a little teeny baseball diamond in it. And I had gone there to study. It was Christmas vacation, because there's something about Berger. I never figured out how to defense him exactly. But I have tennis on my mind from watching what's his face, the world's greatest player, whatever his name is, Novik, who's it? Anyway, I'm sorry. Anyway, And I remember reading about sociopaths, a very high proportion of people, males, who are born with, it's either two X chromosomes or two Y chromosomes rather than the usual X and Y chromosome. I think I've got that right. Were bad to the bone. I mean, they turned out badly, human beings that were thus configured genetically. And it almost knocked me off the park bench. Well, I'm exaggerating, but I just sat there. I was sat there for an hour just saying, well, where does virtue go and where does vice go if this is all mechanically programmed in us? A predisposition greater than that of all of us to evil. I don't remember the profile of these unfortunate guys, but it was not pretty. I mean, very high proportion of conviction of sociopathic behavior, convictions and violence and voting Republican and all kinds of bad stuff. And it stays with me to this day, of the emotion I had at the time. So fast forward, I'm talking to Herbert, and I said, so Herbert, how much freedom do human beings have? I mean, really, how much do we have? I think I've told you guys this before. And he said, it's like ivory soap. I did say this before. Ivory soap is what, 0.56% not pure or something?
99 and 44/100% pure. It floats.
Well, yeah. Well, and Herbert said it's like that. He says the 0.56 of our behavior and all that is our freedom. 0.56. And he said, so, and that's where you work with people, and that's where the adventure is, and that's where the drama is. And so we're free enough to be responsible before God, in some sense. So that was his explanation. What I've come up with, Tom, sort of on my own, is just, we are material beings. We know that we're full of chemicals and firing electrons and all that. We are material, and therefore our behavior and so forth has to have material explanations, because what other explanations can there be? And God's grace has to operate on us materially, because what else is it going to operate on? It's got to elbow its way into neurons and the synapses and ganglia and all that, because that's what God's got to work with us by his own choice, or I don't know. So I've told myself it all still makes sense.
Yeah.
And if I can put the ball in Tom Welber's court, you have been a confessor for many years. Has your approach to being a confessor changed somewhat in line with what George is just describing?
Well, number one, it definitely has, and I reflected it in that guide to making a confession that I
Yes.
sent you all. And essentially, my approach is, or has been, look at your sins and are you sorry for them? And if you're sorry for them, God forgives you. And here's the sign, the instrumental sign, shall we say, or the effective sign of God's forgiveness, ego te absolvo, etc. uh, where I changed the approach is to try to look at it from the perspective of God wanting, out of love, wanting so much to how would I say, to wanting so much for you to let God embrace you. So, God's forgiveness is not conditional. God's forgiveness isn't even the primary thing happening here. God's love is the primary thing happening here. And God simply wants to come to you, but respects the fact that you may not want God to come to you. So what I saw in confession is, try to look at it from God's perspective. And there were some people who were extremely receptive to this thought, and it colored the way that they made their confessions on and on and on, because their confessions usually were rote, and they would say at some point, I'm not satisfied with this. I'm telling the same old sins over and over and over again, and this is becoming less and less meaningful to me. And I'm okay. I'm a good person. Why do I have to keep coming to confession? So that's when I would propose looking at it from God's point of view, that I am wanting you to let me embrace you in my love, to come to you and embrace you in my love fully. Now, what am I as God encountering when I try to do that? Where in your life is the resistance or the inattentiveness or the competing interests that where you don't want me to get in there? And can you trust me enough to put those things in my hands for forgiveness and for healing? And
another thing, excuse me, that has come up recently is community. And as a confessor, I'm wondering, was it helpful to engage penitents into community, that sense of belonging in a parish, in a group, whether it's a 12-step or whatever?
Of course, the problem there is what leads from reconciliation, sacramental reconciliation, to community is Eucharist.
Yes.
Okay.
Say that again, Tom.
What leads from sacramental reconciliation as an individual thing into community is really Eucharist and Eucharistic participation. And one of my complaints with the Vatican II reform, how it was accomplished and how it was implemented, and the I have to almost say willful ignorance of so many church people to try to understand what they were asked to do by way of outward reform, active participation, mass facing the people, vernacular, and all of that stuff was so piss poor because they were intellectually lazy. They didn't want to understand what this really was all about, what Vatican II was all about. So what we ended up having is a very, very spotty, at best, implementation, where in many parishes, it was the priest's preferences that got imposed upon the people.
Yeah.
I sometimes say the attractiveness of the old liturgy is that you were allowed to receive God through Christ in any way that you wanted or were able to. It was sort of like a Marshall McLuhan's cool medium that just engaged you in participation. And believe me, I'm not an advocate of returning to the Tridentine liturgy, but with the old Mass, it could be immensely satisfying because you could approach it at your own level.
Mhm.
And it was there for you to participate in at your own level.
Mhm.
Then comes the Reformed liturgy. And for one thing, you've got to watch the priest staring at you. You've got to obey the priest or the commentator who says, you will now stand and we will now turn to hymn number 43 and sing verses 1, 2, and 5 of such and so. And then you'd have the music director getting mad at you if your lips weren't moving. and you know, that kind of stuff, which to my mind, Marshall McLuhan had a really, really great tool there in distinguishing between hot and cool media.
Yeah.
Because in theory, the old liturgy was a hot medium. It was there, it was presented to you, take it or leave it. That's a hot medium. No participation built in. And yet the experience of it was complete freedom in participation. Whereas the new liturgy was supposed to have all the characteristics of a cool medium in that it involved back and forth participation and sort of a dynamic element of input and response. And that's what it was supposed to be, but it was turned into a hot medium. So very often, you know, you go to the Mass that has the elements that you're really seeking, which is fine. But so very often that experience is, you know, you have to stand, put those damn rosaries away. You have to stand and open your missalette. You down there, open your missalette. Get your missalette out.
Yeah.
And and turn to page such and so and sing such and so and such and so, and be scolded if what you really wanted to do was kneel and commune with the Lord. Oh, you can do that some other time. And so I think a good many people were rightly insulted. Now, for a lot of people, the choices that were made were perfectly in accord with their spirituality. And I would say for most of us who stuck with it, it was pretty much in accord with our spirituality. It was okay. It was opening doors rather than closing doors. But I think we've been somewhat unsympathetic to the fact that the Reformed liturgy, many people experienced it as an imposition rather than a renewed freedom.
But Tom, I
just thought it was weird.
Yeah, I
when
don't
it
want to
started.
interrupt you.
No, I'm finished. I'm
I
trying to be a dialogue person, not a lecturer.
No, but I really wanted to understand what you're saying, and I fault two areas. One in the diocesan administration that did not. Some of it was hostile to, at least in Los Angeles, to the council, and particularly the liturgical stuff.
Yeah.
And because
I have
of
my own experience of that, believe me.
yeah, I can imagine. That's one of the things that drove me. I could not. I said to myself, I can't be a priest, not here. And I tried all over the place, other places, and it was over for me. I mean, I recognized that was not my vocation. Thank God. But I don't think that the diocesan level had the appropriate folks who understood what the council was about and how it was translating its purpose into the various categories or areas of worship and thought and teaching and development.
Mhm.
And so there was an ignorance, and because there wasn't the appreciation with respect to inviting participation, real participation that would include the various levels of development, spiritual development,
Mhm.
that immediately left it for the local pastors.
Mhm.
And then the local pastors, I think, I don't know whether for the most part, I do think for the most part, I'm trying not to be, too blanket in my negative thinking, but they didn't read the documents of the council. They didn't think they had to.
That's right. That's right. And it was simply a kind of a matter of they would do what they were told,
Yeah.
and
Sort of.
sort of. My first pastor, Frank Osborne, he refused to rearrange the altar so that it could be mass facing the people.
Yeah.
Finally, he yielded to it during my time there. And quite frankly, mass, quote, facing the people was the absolute worst thing that ever happened to him, because he spent 30 to 40 years of his priesthood not knowing what people were doing during the mass.
Yeah.
And suddenly he was able to
Now we
see
do.
what people were doing during his mass.
It probably shocked him.
And he got very upset about it. And oh my God, he
Did he
singled,
take it Did he
Pardon?
take it personally?
He did. And he would throw people out of church for behavior that he deemed inappropriate during the mass.
Geez.
My anecdote was single-handedly, he significantly increased the population of our neighboring parishes.
Because people wouldn't worship there. They
Yeah,
wouldn't.
well, you risk getting thrown out,
Yeah.
and a few other indignities. If a woman's knees were visible, she could be barred from coming into church.
You mean for all time or just that day?
Well, when they were coming to mass. In other words, you go and put on a decent length skirt. Of course, that was the advent of the mini skirt
Yeah.
in the very early 70s. And
I remember those as great days. That
yeah,
what I remember about it is just, I left the seminary in '64, June. So, the changes were phased in, right? I mean, the first thing I remember is I have a recollection of Bob Jabro after I was gone, imitating Father Berger at the conclusion of Mass, and Bob going, "Thanks be to God," or however he would have imitated John Berger, "Deo gracias." to be funny, and it, did I think it was funny? I don't remember. But he did, Bob did. But it was phased in, right, over a couple of years?
Supposed to be.
Well, it was phased in, but what I'm coming to realize, and I'm reading right now a biography of Bugnini, who was the key reform person, that the reforms in Rome were sometimes hastily put together and sometimes shoved in front of Paul VI. And Paul VI was in favor, very much in favor of the reform, but not always able to evaluate all the details of it. Here, sign off on this, and then a document would come out, and another document would come out, and sometimes it would semi-contradict each other, and so on and so forth. So there was a sense of a rushed reform that basically, I would say what probably should have been planned in a consultative, synodal way over the course of a generation, with consistent reforms in the form of tweaking rather than just putting a deadline on preparing a whole new missile. I think that would have been much more successful. And if the experts had been involved in a more consultative, collaborative way, rather than selected experts being told, okay, you reform this part of it. There's one story of two of the experts. They were, I think they were both Benedictines, but they were charged with composing one of the new Eucharistic prayers. And the deadline was such that they had to do it over lunch at a Roman restaurant. And then that was submitted for approval. And so looking back into the details of just how the reform progressed, produced some flaws. And of course, it was all presented as this is an accomplished fact. As of the first Sunday of Advent, you must use this new book and you must get rid of the old book. And that kind of thing. And the seeds of failure actually, I think, were planted in that methodology. And no matter how much, and I always felt, and I had a lot of arguments, especially with the liturgical police in one of my parishes, Our Lady of the Assumption, who were basically trying to enforce the new liturgy against some degree of resistance, or what they, how do we get people to sing? How do we get people to pay attention? How do we get people to put down their missalettes and listen and blah, blah, blah. And, I was saying, you don't get them to do it by just telling them to do it. You don't even get people to do it by telling them why. You don't convince by giving reasons. You convince by good experience.
Mm-hmm.
Then you reflect on good experience.
Absolutely.
And we were not consistent in giving. We were not consistent in practicing what we, and I would say I, as one of them, were trying to preach. You try to preach good Eucharistic theology, and you celebrate Mass where the priest is praying the Eucharistic prayer as if he was reading a telephone book. And
back to Berger.
And people are hearing at every Mass now, they are hearing, take this and eat it this is my body, which is given up for you. Take this and drink from it. This is the chalice of my blood, cup of my blood back then, and so on. They were hearing that, do this in memory of me. And then what they were experiencing was watching the priest consume the host that was consecrated, drink all that was in the chalice, and going to the tabernacle for leftovers to give to the people. So the living connection
Mhm.
between that
Consecration.
celebration of the Eucharist and the people's participation in the Eucharist, summed up in reception of communion, was broken. It was not a part of their experience.
Right.
The breaking of the bread was supposed to be the breaking of one loaf, as St. Paul says, for distribution to many. Instead, it was crack the small large host in half, put those halves together, and the priest holds them up, and then he eats both halves and goes to the tabernacle. So, and that type of practice remains. You know, that still
Better
is,
now.
yeah, maybe for those who are left.
Maybe that's why, you know.
Yeah, I'm sadly critical, because I honestly think if at the time I went to Rome, now this is going to sound arrogant, but at the time I went to Rome, if 3 other like-minded young priests of the Archdiocese had actually been able to have the same formation in liturgy that I had, were able to talk about it among themselves and come back and be supported in educating the presiders, educating the liturgical ministers as to the meaning of what it is you're being asked to do, we may have had better success.
Mhm.
But as it is, I still am a little bit passionate about the pain that I felt of having to fight and struggle to get study in liturgy actually accepted as an important discipline for the renewal of the church.
I can really imagine that.
Now,
Well, you Ned, were in it with Trower and Bramble.
Well,
You know,
what's
and-
occurring to me is, various things. One, which has always puzzled me, I still don't understand it. And I saw it when I was a deacon, bouncing around. I was in 3 different parishes. I was the longest with Father Trower. And that was a really excellent experience for me, in spite of the fact that he was supposed to, quotes, break me. And I'll explain that. I mean, if I don't get into a monologue here, but one of the things, Tom, that you said just really rings, I resonate with having experienced, and that is when we were in the seminary, we had people that we hung around with a lot, but there was, I felt, a kind of a communitarian general sense of things. We could talk to each other. It didn't matter whether we didn't hang around together all the time, but we could talk with anybody. And there was a friendly and almost, I use this word advisedly, but almost a determinative element in the dynamic that went on, I think, because we influenced each other. And then after ordination, something happened that created silos among the new ordinands, and that was already in existence among the ordained priests.
Mhm.
There was how each had their own way of celebrating Mass. Each had their own way of thinking. Each had their own ways about a whole bunch of things.
Mhm.
And it didn't seem that they were interested in some kind of a communitarian dialogue that would help mature one another
Mhm.
by exchanging thoughts and, clashing and then reconciling and, that kind of dynamic.
Mhm.
And so
I don't want to have, up until, I don't know what year, 66, 68, somewhere in there, there was a common culture in the American church, in the American priesthood, certainly in the LA priesthood.
Mhm.
And by the time you all were ordained in 68, Tom, it was smashed. I mean, how many, our class, when you guys were newly ordained, how often did you get together?
Yeah,
As a group?
I dropped out of that getting together probably around third year after ordination. And in part it was because our get-togethers wasted half the day arguing about what we should do. First of all, a third of the day was wasted because somebody would have to, have a funeral, so he couldn't get off on the day off until noon or so. And then we'd spend a couple of hours arguing over what to do. I thought, I'm just gonna celebrate early. I'm gonna celebrate the 6:30 Mass and get in my car and go out and take a drive. And then visit some people that I had gotten to know. Kind of one of the nice things about going to Rome after the first parish and then after the second parish, each one for a year, was that I had built up a group of lay friends in the parishes that I could go and visit without causing scandal in the parish or without causing jealousy in the parish, because they were not in my current parish. And I'm still in touch with and very close friends with some from that time. Karen, the person that I'm staying with, who has been very much a lifelong, very close friend, she's now got a particular need that I can help take care of physically as far as her health is concerned. And I'm rather grateful to be able to have my own health situation being monitored by somebody who really does care for me, rather than a pastor where I'm retired and the pastor sort of, if I'd be lucky, might check in and send a housekeeper to take care of me the rest of the day or whatever, as happens too often.
Yeah, I found so much isolation.
Yeah.
When I first went to St. Dorothy's with Bill Trower, the night that I was there, the first night that I was there, I had two kind of startling experiences. One was Bill Trower, somewhere around 8:30, the phone rang, and I heard him yell, "Sons of bitches!" And then he picked up the phone and says, "Hello, St. Dorothy's, Father Trower here. How can I help you?" That was, I broke up and I couldn't stop laughing for a while about that one. And then shortly after that, I can't remember his name, but the associate pastor, the assistant pastor, whatever the hell they were, knocked on my door. I had the door closed. I was playing my guitar. And I opened the door and he had his hand behind his back. And he said, "I'm going to introduce you to the best friend you're ever going to have in the priesthood." And he handed me a bottle of Chivas.
Oh.
And he looked at me and he said, That's what's going to be your best friend, and turn around and left. And he was a real, he was apagado. He was turned, his light was out. Um,
Mhm.
so it seemed to me that, Trower didn't like him. He didn't like Trower. He went out and celebrated the mass in a very mechanical way. And here I come, and Trower and I almost immediately hit it off. And he told me very early on that he was crazy. I'm crazy, Ned, he said, and I'm too old to change. But you go ahead and you do what you think. I don't believe in this new liturgy. I will do some of it, but some of it I won't.
Mhm.
But he was very honest about it, and he celebrated some of the mass in Latin and some of the mass in English. But you go ahead and you do. Let's see how it turns out. And he was always happy. He says, your homilies are very doctrinally oriented, the little stories, kind of stuff like that. Sometimes you get a little grandiose, but I really like it, And the other guy, again, whose name I can't remember, he was just a sullen, sorry guy. And I'd go to Norm Supanchek's parish, and I'd go to other parishes, and I found guys that seemed to, for some reason or other, not to connect with the priests in their own rectories,
Mhm.
and not connect further with our the friends that we made when we were ordained.
Mhm.
That we
Back
had.
to that term silos, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so how do you live in any kind of thoughtful, growing way if you don't have people who have had your background, theology, philosophy, the priests that taught us, that common culture.
Mhm.
And I don't see how I try to do the same thing you did. I gathered 4, 5, 6 people from the lay, from our congregation, and we'd have weekly meetings, and I was able to go to their homes. I'd go do a funeral, and I'd come back. I mean, the ceremony at the cemetery, and then I'd stop at somebody's place and have tea with the wife, and talk. And then one time a week we'd get together and we'd pray, and just it became really kind of a lifesaver for me. And then guys started getting into Jesus Caritas, that I thought, wow, that's going to be a good thing. I was never able to do that. I don't know why. But so if you didn't read the documents, or your pastor was, like, what was his name? Frank what?
Osborne,
Osborne.
Ozzy,
Yeah.
Ozzy the Burn, they call him.
And I had one like that the first time. So there was no way of growing, and the diocese didn't provide any, that I knew of,
Mhm.
any invitation to learn with some kind of halfway charismatic person who could connect and teach and introduce the documents and review them and all that kind of stuff. So it was a dead thing right to begin with.
And I was kind of attracted to the idea of Jesu Caritas and priestly fraternity and all of that. And yet it just seemed very artificial. And, when it started happening, and I think Gabriel was one of them, where, active participant in Jesu Caritas, where you're supposed to get all of this support, suddenly is married by the time of the next meeting, and nobody had an inkling about it. I thought, I don't know if that would be so helpful. Where personally, where I what was my salvation was during my second time in Rome, when I was really having some struggles, probably the strongest struggles I had with vocation. I got to know John McAnulty, who was the Jesuit. He was at that time, I think, in his 60s, maybe 50s, but he'd retired from most everything else that he had done for the province. And he had the idea that he wanted to start the Priest's House of Prayer in Los Angeles. And he went to Rome for a year to study spirituality at the Greg, and then come back and had Cardinal Manning's support to start, to start the House of Prayer on that Waverly Drive, the Immaculate Heart retreat house, novitiate, whatever it was at that time, in one of the outlying rooms, outlying buildings that used to be Earl C. Anthony's movie projector place, movie theater. And he was basically just given that with a key and an assurance of some support. But he became my spiritual director, and it was that spiritual direction, first from him, and then more recently from Jack Stager, that has been my own personal salvation.
That was a good, that was a grace.
Yeah. So that was a grace, but I didn't put much stock in any, even though I was participating in the liturgical structures and all of that, I was never able to have a position where I could be enough part of the officialdom to actually try to make some kind of a difference in how liturgy is viewed and celebrated in the church in Los Angeles. Now, I need to say, I frequently since then have had occasion to say, thank God, there but for the grace of God. Why? Because people in that position, some of them did not fare all that well.
Yeah.
And
Now, in which position?
director of liturgy for the archdiocese.
Well, who Barry was such, was he not?
John Barry? No, he was religious ed.
That's right. What am I thinking? Of course.
Under McIntyre, it was Gibson.
Yeah.
So Gibson
Larry?
and Ward were the basic liturgy people. Under Manning,
Gibson and who?
Ward, John
Gibson.
Ward, Bishop Ward.
Oh my, I mean, talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, Ward.
And those eggs were delicious. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, Ward would have done everything he could have to undermine it.
Of course. That's why he was there. And then
Yeah.
Manning comes along and he didn't want to make waves. So
Yeah, what the hell? He was only a cardinal, only an archbishop.
yeah, but he was the great mediator. He didn't want to offend anybody. So they kept their influence. And
Larry Gibson.
and when he actually did establish the liturgy office, the executive director was this crazy nun, Sister Cecilia, not Cecilia Louise, Miriam Joseph Carondelet, who wasn't a liturgist. She was a musician, a music teacher. And that's, of course, one of my other pet peeves. Insofar as there was any real progress in liturgy, it was under the domination of musicians, not liturgists.
Yeah.
And, but that's a whole nother story. So then she just pathologically clung to that position throughout Manning's time. And I was relegated. I was always thought of as being a little suspicious. So I was sort of relegated to, okay, you can do the work, but you don't have any authority. I'm letting it all hang out now. And to be really honest,
Oh.
there's nothing in here except coffee.
Well,
Usually I don't talk this way until the second bottle of wine. But Miriam Joseph persevered into Mahoney's time. And once during Manning's time, I was designated to take over the liturgy office when Miriam Joseph actually made good on her resignation, because there was one time that she resigned. But she wouldn't go. And Manning refused to
Push her out.
push her out. And so she stayed on, and finally,
Yeah. That's a,
when I refused to go, Manning, or when I refused to stay with liturgy in the Archdiocese until such time as she got out, I basically told Manning to shut her get off the pot. And he said, well, you know, I'm not going to force her out. And then the next person that he sent to study was Doug Ferraro.
yeah,
And he sent him,
I actually slightly knew him, very
Yeah.
slightly.
well, he sent him to study liturgy at the same place I did. And he took 5 years to do what should be done in 3 years. But he did get a doctorate, which I never was able to do.
well, you weren't allowed.
Right. I probably could have the second time I went if I had really wanted to, but by then it wasn't easy for me to get back into the swing of things in Rome.
The academic stuff.
You know, it had been disrupted to the point where culturally, academically, and so on, I did not find there was enough continuity for me to be able to. It's a more complicated story, but that's sufficient. So then Doug Ferraro became kind of the favored boy. And when Mahoney came on, he was talking about appointing me. He had to get rid of Miriam Joseph. He couldn't stand her. And he told me that he would make me the director of the liturgy office. And so he sent me a letter of appointment. And then a week later, sent me a letter unappointing me, because he had talked with
People
several
are crazy,
people.
Dad.
He had talked to several people at the Archdiocese, and they said, "Oh, be careful of him. He will push the liturgy to extremes."
Oh, geez.
And so he never talked to me about liturgy, actually, but he
This was,
unappointed me, which was probably the best thing that ever happened.
was that Manning or
That was
Mahoney.
Mahoney.
Good Lord.
In his this was all in its first year here. But what was when Manning refused to get rid of
Miriam Joseph.
Miriam Joseph, you know, in some ways that was the best thing that happened, because that's when I got into campus ministry.
Ah,
And the 11 years I was in campus ministry was very restorative and refreshing. And I was able to see a different, more dynamic part of the church. I see its flaws now very much, but more dynamic area of collaboration in ministry among priests, religious, and lay professionals.
If I can interrupt, that 11 years, it seems to me, was the ideal preparation for you to be a pastor.
Yeah,
Was it
I
soon
would,
after that?
I would very strongly agree with that. And a part of it was I became quite close with Sister Cecilia Louise, who was the former president of Mount St. Mary's University, and then became the education secretariat director, and then the chancellor for the archdiocese. And
Oh, yes.
she and I were good for, she's the one that I would say was my principal mentor in my life. And under her, I developed an interest in going to Pepperdine to do the EDD program in institutional management, and had the support and the time from her to be able to do that. And I think that helped me a great deal in, managing a Our Lady of Assumption for 15 years.
Was that
And it provided the thing that I tripped over when I went to Beverly Hills, because I thought there might be the same receptivity to development in Beverly Hills, and well, no, there wasn't.
Tom, what you just said again reminds me, at every parish that I went, I developed a really great relationship with the nuns, and particularly the nun in charge. At the last parish, the nun, the principal of the school, and I ran the parish because the priest, Father Betta, was gone Sunday afternoon, and he wouldn't show back till Friday night or Saturday.
What order was she?
I'm sorry?
What order was she?
A Carondelet.
The dynamic ones were the Carondelettes and the Immaculate Hearts.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the Carondelettes did not pick a fight with McIntyre the way that the Immaculate Hearts did.
Yeah.
And so they were able to now they're still dying. Now they're not getting vocations, and scarcely a week goes by when you're not reading an obituary in the LA Times.
Yeah, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange also are pretty much in the same place.
Yeah.
But I now recall that I'd get up in the morning.
Bob Spader.
Spader, that was him. Bob Spader. That was the guy that was at St. Dorothy's with Bill Trower, who was just this dried up.
He died recently, incidentally, I believe.
I'm glad you dug his name up. I couldn't remember, but the friendships that I had with those superior nuns and the rest of the nuns, but the superiors, that was wonderful. And I wonder if other guys, like you, had that same kind of experience. That sort of kept things going, and you always had to worry about whether people were thinking that there was some shenanigans going on. But God, what a dysfunctional situation.
Really, I got to excuse myself, or I will be dysfunctional too.
George Crook, you sent out a link to the Greek Orthodox. Was that you?
Yes. It's a book.
Well, I got to read maybe the first 12 pages, then I would have had to buy the book, but I thought it was well done. And I'm not surprised it got your attention. Are you aware my mentor, Gino Toole, who ran Faith Formation at St. John Newman for 30 some years, had a very close relationship with the Greek Orthodox, who were only 3 blocks down the boulevard from us. Bible studies and discussions, book studies. It was a great chemistry between the Catholic and the Greek Orthodox there.
No, I wasn't aware of that. Well, no, I from time to time you've alluded to the Greek Orthodox down the street, but I didn't know how close the relationship became.
That was thanks to O'Toole.
Yeah, well, now that Tom's, I want to come back to this Greek Orthodox thing, but Tom, now I'm an old guy, as we all are, but I mean, I am just fascinated ever since I met Herbert by the liturgy. And, you know, when I read stuff that like lex orandi est lex credendi, or I don't know if I've got it right, but prayer, the liturgy is what our faith is. You
Mhm.
know, that's the dogma. And well, wow. Our decision as to what we were going to canonize as the New Testament books was based on the books that were getting read at Mass, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
etc. I mean, the how much more important is the liturgy to me now, as I see it, as I understand it, limited as I may be, compared to, I think, the understanding of all these priests out there saying Mass in Latin when I was an older boy. You know, I mean, people talk about the old church with such nostalgia. And, you know, it was the nicotine hands of some priests when he was giving you communion at 6:30 Mass.
And the alcohol on their breath,
Not to mention.
or at least
and-
the stale breath of hangover breath.
Yeah. And I mean, I am convinced that we have a better presbyterate in LA now by far than we did, well, even after I came back, say in 1990. I think the priests are more fervent. I think they're better read. Do you agree with that?
I do, some.
Sandoval,
Okay.
Sandoval sure is a good example of what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And you know, he's now directing the
the
Jubilee, the 250th Jubilee,
Oh,
250th anniversary of the founding of San Gabriel Mission.
Is he like a baron, George?
no. Is he like a baron?
Like Robert Barron? I mean, he sounds like he's got a great mind and an awareness of things and an understanding of the diocese. Blah blah blah.
Oh, that's true. Dodson told me, I got to call Paul, I haven't done it. But he said he's read everything. Paul was his parish priest when he was growing up.
You mentioned he was
And he,
mentor.
incidentally, all you non-Paul fans, Father Sandoval loves Dodson's ass, you know, he
Mhm.
really does.
Yes, no, I know. I'm in awe. I don't know how that happened, but I'm so happy it did. Yeah.
You know, we got to talk about that someday. It's interesting. I'm not saying I'm right about Paul. I'm just saying I've always had a weakness for him.
Well, great.
I've also had hurt feelings in his hands, at least twice.
Mhm.
And I haven't had that with anybody else that I can think of.
I almost punched him out once.
Huh?
I once almost punched him out. I was so upset with him. And he didn't have a clue.
Well, just because he called you a dirty Mexican, I mean, why would you?
Oh, that's not too far from, you know.
Well, everybody did that. So
Yeah, right.
Oh my.
That's why I made it so well there. I love the seminary. I really did.
But I don't
one
want to
difference-
talk about Paul. But he told me, he said, Parker's, he calls him. He says, even when he was a kid, you know, in grammar school, he wanted to be a priest. I think it was some sort of throwback to our era.
Wow.
I wouldn't be surprised if he had one of those play Mass kits, you know,
Mhm.
that used, but he said, he's read everything. He said he knows the Bible, you know, intimately, and he's read everything.
Would that
Also,
there were lots of them around.
but don't you think, is he on track to be a bishop? Is that and does anybody think that but me?
Oh, I don't know if anybody else thinks that. I certainly do. I mean, he's just, you look around at the priests of the archdiocese who, you know, have any kind of a public presence, and priests of his generation, of his age, they're the ones that they would be looking for. And I would say he's probably being groomed for it, yeah.
I would hope, you know, which is what Dad is saying. I mean, don't you think, John, he is just a standout guy as a priest?
Sandoval.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, you know, it'll be sort of a wait and see thing.
He's not as young as he looks.
He
He's
does
young.
look young. He does look
Right.
very young. But he's very
Um,
articulate, very comfortable with folks, you know.
But you know, there is one thing that I'm very grateful about, or to Gomez for, that, you know, he hasn't, for all of his Opus Dei-ness and obvious conservatism, he hasn't gone off the deep end the way Cordileone has done.
Far from it. Far
Far
from
from
it. Yeah.
And, you know, the adherence to the Tridentine rite and accompanying smells, bells, and costumes, you know, does not seem to be in any way a part of his worldview. He doesn't seem to chafe at having to celebrate liturgy in the Taj Mahoney, which I could see. I could see the likes of Cordileone immediately decorating the place with Baroque doodads.
Do you like the Taj Mahoney?
I think it's got a marvelous interior space
I do too.
and is thoroughly ugly and embarrassingly ugly from the outside.
Outside, yeah, I agree. But inside it's quite good, I think.
And the best thing that Mahoney had to say about it was, you know, he said, these critics of what I've done here have to realize
What?
that it's really not finished, because the landscaping hasn't grown up enough to put it into its proper.
Oh,
You know,
come on.
landscape
It's
can't-
how many years has it had already?
Well, you know the old saying that the difference between a surgeon and an architect. A surgeon gets to bury his mistakes. An architect has to plant ivy.
You know, Herbert told me once that the Jesuits had invited Roger to dinner at Loyola. So he's going down there to dinner, and the day before they all said, "Oh my God, we're actually going to have to talk to him." I mean, like, what are we going to talk about with this man? You know, who's not scintillating. And Herbert was tasked with coming up with some topics. And he laughed. And so he writes down on an index card various topics of conversation. And he said the one that they just lit up, he wrote down, "Your Eminence, will you be obtaining new vestments for the new cathedral worship?" And he said it was such a hit with Roger that whoever asked him that was the conversation for the whole dinner, was Mahoney talking about the new vestments that he was going to buy for
Yeah.
the cathedral. You know,
And I find it very
Oh.
interesting that Gomez continues to wear the same vestments.
well, I should hope so.
Yeah, well, they harmonize with the environment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and the only thing that he's done was to put Mary um, beautifully, in the replacing the tapestry in the back wall.
Yesterday, I was at the Pastoral Center and picked up the next piece of the implementation of the Called and Gifted program. And I am so grateful that Gomez has chosen this team to make Called and Gifted a tool for all faith formation instructors and part of the diaconate formation and part of the certification, because it really leads toward contemplation and implementation in life experience and a common language. I think I sent you a little piece about the Called and Gifted and how those steps for formation with scriptures and books and patron saints and all. I think Gomez has made a great step there.
John, what does Gomez have to do with us, with Orange Diocese?
Oh, not Gomez, Van.
Oh.
I- Thank you for correcting me.
Okay, I'm glad too.
I made the jump to Van without the name change. Sorry about that.
Yeah. You know, when I, but
Van?
George, you might put in a little plug for Called and Gifted to Parker, because
Well, I
I'm very
will.
impressed with that program too.
Yeah,
We
Or
We did it,
better yet,
but I don't know that we followed through well enough at.
And that's where
OLA.
I went to Colorado Springs and got trained on that follow-up and the individual consultations and then the formation of small faith groups. And I mean, it's a powerful tool. And pardon me, it's Van, not Gomez. It's Van.
I'm good. I just,
Gave the blessing to that. And by the way, the entire faith formation leadership group at the diocese is women and well-trained and passionate women.
well, that's,
I'm a rare male in the middle of this.
what did you say? There were 4 or 5 of them and 1 of you.
Yeah. But I mean, it's totally respectful and endorsed. And I'm excited about where it's going.
Good.
And
Gomez
look,
speak,
just look
speak-
forward to mentoring a few of the additional next generation folks.
Gomez speaks much better Spanish than Van, John.
Claro que sí, I get it.
You know, Tom,
Van's Spanish is so bad. I mean, I guess he's fluent in his vocabulary and grammar, but
Van?
his pronunciation is just, it's
Charlie Bard.
non-Tech Spanish, you know.
Charlie
just-
Bard died too soon.
George, you're talking about Van?
Yeah,
Oh,
Van's
he's got
Spanish.
one vowel, which is in English called a schwa, but he's got one vowel is when he speaks Spanish, which is Well, no. You know?
you know, when I first heard about Opus Dei, it was characterized to me in a very negative light.
Mhm.
And then I found out that Gomez was a very prominent member of such. And so I, immediately associated what I had been told. And then one day I had occasion to read a nice portion of their mission and that kind of stuff. And I looked at it, I thought, wow, this isn't bad. This isn't what I was told it was. It's good theology. It's good, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess it's just the personalities that are attracted to it. I liked it, and I thought that that's what we were given in the seminary, and what could easily be developed into a Vatican II foundation. So I don't like Gomez myself, because I don't. He needs to be so much more dynamic and etc. But he does not seem to be as reactive as I thought he was.
Yeah, the problem is if he were more dynamic, he might be more reactive. So,
But I don't, no make I either. I don't dislike him. I just, he's there.
he's,
But-
that's kind of the way he is.
Yeah, and but I'll tell you this: when the catechumens from St. Charles go down to the cathedral, for the first show and tell with the bishop, they come back raving about him. Gomez, just the way he talks to them and the things he says. And
Good to hear.
yeah, it is.
It seemed to me a very pastoral thing, this Opus Dei, what I read.
Well,
Well, what I've read of it makes me admire them pretty much. I mean, when did they first hit prominence? It was at John Paul's pontificate, maybe when he made him a personal prelature or whatever it was.
yeah, but I remember back at Queen of Angels, being exposed to a book by Escriva that I think had Opus Dei in its title. And there were a number of fellow seminarians at that time who were reading him and were impressed. And I can remember, good spiritual reading there. I don't remember anything about it really.
I remember I found Paul Dodson explained them to me when we were in early high school. It started in Spain, and it was sort of like a religious order for laymen, and people prominent in the Spanish government at the time, i.e. Franco's time, were members of it and very fervent. And then the next thing was, maybe it was that stupid novel and movie by Dan Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And everything kind of did polarize under John Paul for a while.
Yeah.
So, the more or less conservative side of the center organization would have been viewed so askance by the liberals. I mean, there's this pettiness in the church. This just, ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, these right-wing Catholic websites are just so bad.
That Life Site, is that what it is called? Life Site?
Yeah, that's one of them.
Oh, I can't believe it.
Church Militant.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Jeez. That priest.
Father Altman.
No, that's what I was thinking about. What an idiot.
That's the guy from Wisconsin.
Oh,
Yeah.
good God. My right-wing son, I'm getting some hope. He started to read the Vatican II documents, and he said, "Hey, that makes a whole lot of sense."
Well, duh.
But I have more hope now. But anyway.
Well, let's see if he'll get in line to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
Don't you guys think that was a mistake by Biden?
I do.
It looks like it looks like he's flailing out.
Yeah.
I'm going to issue a decree that everybody's going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought it was right on. And I've been in the position.
I haven't read it. I'm just thinking of the politics and leadership of it. I wish. I think every anti-vaccine argument I've heard, frankly, is stupid.
Yeah.
in my opinion.
And I agree with that.
Uh,
John, it's just a matter of how. It's a
And-
how thing, not a what.
And the conservatives were poised. They were ready the minute it came out. And
Oh, of course.
they packaged everything he said in their favor. And
That's why it was such a bad, idea in the way he said it. He is being very, very hard. I mean, he wants to look like a big leader, and he's missing it. I think. I think
I do too.
time will tell.
Yeah.
Speaking of time, 11:59 a.m.
It
Tom,
is. 1 minute and
Uh-oh.
it'll be afternoon.
Well, let me ask you guys just a quick question. I thought this Texas law on abortion was going to help Biden politically immensely. I thought people, moderates, women, professional women, single women, would just recoil at this Texas legislation. And the Democrats would reap that harvest. But I saw a poll that said the plurality of the country thinks it's a great idea. What was it? 46% of people favor this legislation.
Wow, I did not expect that. I expected what you said, George.
Yeah, I'm just amazed.
You got the thing I sent yesterday or the day before about, yesterday, about from the pro-life Democrats,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
Kristen Day,
Mhm.
which I thought was interesting, that pointing out that, hand in hand, here is an opportunity for abortion providers to broaden their care. Because apparently Texas also passed a significant legislation for support for maternal and prenatal care.
Mhm.
That kind of nobody pays too much attention to, but it goes hand in hand with, if you're going to restrict abortion, take care of the people who are in this.
and if I just made a donation yesterday to Obria, OBRIA. If you're not familiar, they are a fabulous support group.
Great
And
agent. Yeah,
I can't endorse them more.
agreed. Was a Catholic group first, and now it's become, more ecumenical.
Yeah.
And it's really good. Darlene's had the manager speak with the.
Hi, George.
Bye, George.
Wait,
Hi, George.
I didn't mean to do that.
All we see is the letter G.
Yeah.
Here
Oh, there you are.
There you
There you
are.
are. Well, on that note,
book
shall we?
review, I
got it.
sent you guys this morning a book review about this book about Eastern Orthodoxy. Check it out.
got
Look at it on Kindle and read the first chapter or something and see what you think. I'm finding it fascinating, but I don't know
I did
anything
too.
about Eastern
Yeah.
Orthodoxy.
Sounds good.
I told John I'd like to send the review to Ralph Platts and tell him chapter 3 in the book talks about 4 fathers of the church. The one whose name I remember at the moment, well, Irenaeus first, and then Tertullian, and then I'm skipping one, and then Cyprian.
Ignatius? Ignatius?
No, he was too early for this chapter.
Clement?
But who?
Clement?
No.
Okay.
And their role in the development of the doctrine of the Trinity. And it was just fascinating. I don't understand it at all, what he's saying, but I have some insight now. Herbert introduced me once. We were having dinner and he says, "Oh, let me meet my dear friend, Joe." And Joe was this Jesuit of about Herbert's age. And Joe was introduced to me as the foremost theologian expert on the Trinity, either in the Society of Jesus or in the Roman Catholic Church. I don't remember which, but neither is chopped liver, you know. and and he was just the most wonderful man. He really was a kind, just, you know. But he and Herbert started talking about the dance in the Trinity. And I just sat there open-mouthed. And this chapter sort of gets into what the term the divine dance surfaces, you know.
Rohr does that.
Good image. Yes, Rohr does.
Now, who was the one? I was actually trying to look up your email, but who was
The Jesuit.
The Jesuit that you were?
I don't know his name.
Joe,
Perhaps
Joe
somebody-
was his first name.
Pardon
And
me?
he was about
That
Joe's-
should help.
Joe Bracken, perhaps?
Boy, that sounds familiar.
Joe Bracken, actually, he's written several books on the Trinity. He is one of the experts on it. He is also the foremost, he's still alive. He has to be pushing 90. He is the foremost, maybe the only serious Catholic theologian who is a process theologian. And
I think that's his name.
he spent some time, he's a delightful guy. He spent
He was wonderful.
spent a couple of, I've got to know him fairly well because he spent twice in my time there, spent 6 months or so at OLA in Claremont on sabbatical or doing some kind of program with the Center for Process Studies.
How do you spell bracket? CK or just K?
CK,
CK.
Bracken, SJ.
I think you get a couple of things if you type Joseph Bracken and Lonergan in a Google search too.
I've got God, three who are one, the world in the Trinity. My goodness, Christianity and process thought, spirituality for a changing world.
That's the guy. I just pulled up his picture. These are older pictures of him.
Yeah.
I just typed in Joseph Bracken SJ and Googled and then did images. So like the second picture, yeah.
But interestingly, he was also rather traditional in his spirituality. He would, you would very often see him walking around the parking lot praying the rosary, which of course is sort of a sign that you don't necessarily see a cutting edge modern theologian.
I wish Fred were here, because when he asked that question about, let's see a show of hands on the rosary, it was pretty clear to me Fred was surprised to see as many hands as he did, but I remember reading an article in America and years and years ago, about how simple the personal piety of great theologians is. And I remember the author was describing a Protestant theologian, and I don't remember who it was. Might have been Paul Tillich, or it might have been the guy from Switzerland. I can't think of his name. The Calvinist, Matt knows, took courses from Barth. It might have been Barth. And he was getting some award, and somebody said, well, Reverend or Mr. Professor Barth, if you could sum up your theology, or why do you believe so fervently, and how have you been able to make all these contributions? And he said, it's very simple. I'm trying to remember the word. I just believe that I know that Jesus loves me so because the Bible tells me so. And that was it, you know. And the same author talked about Karl Rahner, of all, you know, Karl Rahner sitting there being given an award, and the ceremony was going on, and somebody looked, and he was sitting there running his hands over his rosary, you know, to pass the time.
Well, there were
And
many
Herbert,
times, George, that
Herbert-
I was with Herb, and after dinner, we'd go outside and pray the rosary, walking around the LMU campus.
well, he knew better than try that shit with me. But at least in those days, now it would work. I would do it. But Herbert, when we had him with us in Hawaii for 3 times, you know, for at least 2 weeks at a throw, and he'd get up in the morning, go out on the veranda, and read a little book of the Gospels, and pray for an hour, you know, just quietly, and that was it, you know. Gosh, what a thank you for that, Ned. I owe you.
So Aquinas is right. You know, all of this stuff that I've written and blah, 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 is just a bunch of straw. All I need is a crucifix.
I don't know, but it sure is interesting to read, you know, like this book on the Greek Orthodox. Boy, is that interesting.
I'm gonna,
And then their history, their philosophy of the state is very different from that emerged in the Western Church, you know.
yeah. Tom, do you remember, and John, you may have been there, when Eberhard came in one day to our class and gave us just one class about the Eastern Orthodox fathers. And just, he blew me away because he read from several, and it was poetry. It was wonderful poetry. And he said, yeah, they weren't Tertullians, you know, they weren't lawyers, they weren't sitting there defining stuff. They were rhapsodizing about it, you know, and I loved that.
By the way, I don't remember that, but
Okay.
Blessed Isaac of Stella has a piece in today's Office of Readings that basically carries the entire, it begins with the power of God to forgive sins, but carries the whole relationship of the church with Christ as the bride of Christ, Christ sharing everything with his bride. And he goes into that in the most eloquent and poetic way possible, developing that metaphor. And, you know, it's pretty clearly a metaphor, and he's aware of that, but he just develops that in an absolutely beautiful way. Let me send you that.
Oh, that'd be super.
Good. Love to see it.
Send it to you. It really touched me.
I listen to the Office of Readings while I go for a walk, and it cut out on me when I got past, I don't know which of the prophets we're reading. Was it Jeremiah? No.
I think it's Jeremiah, yeah.
Is it? Well, okay, I got
I think it was
past that.
Lamentations, as a matter of fact.
It was Lamentations, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Okay, well, we'll go back to it and see if you can catch, I think it
will.
was Isaac of
Just-
Stella.
Yeah, the recording stopped.
I gotta go.
We gotta go. We all gotta go.
Well,
When you
I
gotta
think
go, you
watch
gotta
over
go.
that.
You go
Until
for
next
it.
Wednesday.
So adios, everyone,
Adios.
God bless.
and pushing the end button.